Hello, everyone. My name is Christian. Welcome back to my hobby blog. I'm very excited today because I have two fantastic guests with me to discuss my reread of Deadhouse Gates, which is book 2 of Malazan. We're going to have a non-spoiler section, spoiler section, and full series spoiler section. I don't think I would talk really about the Esselmont books too much. I may talk about book 4, which is Orb Scepter Throne, because there is a character in this book that appears in that one, and that was really
Oh,
exciting. But I want to welcome to the channel Kathy from Nerdy Kathy. She's a fantastic YouTuber. I love watching her videos. I'm so happy to
thank
have
you.
her here with me. So I also want to welcome back Philip, who has been on the channel before. I just interviewed him about his series, and that was fantastic. That was a really nice discussion. So welcome back, Philip, and welcome, Kathy. How are y'all doing?
Very well, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I am very honored to be here and always happy to talk about malazan anytime. Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, Malazan for me is one of my top 3 favorite fantasy series, and this book specifically on my first read, it really made me commit to reading the entire 10-book series because I was so driven by the emotional arcs as well as the characters. The world building
Yeah.
is fantastic still. Book 1 had a lot of that, but I think book 2 is when it really starts to click together for me as a first time reader. But on my reread, there was only one storyline that I didn't enjoy as much, but everything else I enjoyed even more while reading it again. And I would love to hear sort of what you guys thought of Deadhouse Gates on your first read, and if you've reread it already, kind of give us your thoughts on that. How does this book feel for you as a fantasy reader? And Kathy, you
Do you
can
want
go
to go
first. Yeah.
me first? Okay. This was the book that decided me I had to read the entire series. Whilst I loved Gardens of the Moon, and I actually did, it was when I was reading this, and not at the beginning. At the beginning, I didn't love it. I wanted my bridge burners. I wanted to be in Jenna Bacchus, and we're in this new world with all these new characters, some who I really didn't like. But as I went through the book, and especially the Chain of Dogs, because I'm even wearing my Chain of Dogs t-shirt, that just changed my whole perception, not just of the series, but also the writing. And it was the Chain of Dogs, though, that as it was unfolding, it became so emotional for me watching the struggles, the losses, the pain and suffering, and the sheer determination of these soldiers to get everyone to Aaron. And I was so invested. Like it was as if I was walking the chain of dogs with them. So when the ending came, it devastated me. And I cannot remember another book doing that to me to such a degree that I was crying and I couldn't believe what I was reading. And I thought, I don't know any other author who's really taken such a gamble and killed off a major character like that in such horrible circumstances. I've read about character deaths before, like in George R. R. Martin's Game of Thrones, the first book, and that was my first time seeing a major character killed off. But this was so much more impactful because of how he was killed, of how these people suffered, of the betrayals and all of that. So this book for me is still the epitome of fantasy as far as I'm concerned. It's the best book I have read, I think, in fantasy. Yeah.
That's fantastic. What about you, Philip?
Well, it sounds like the three of us are similar in terms of our first time reading Malazan and reading Deadhouse Gates and realizing there's something very special about this series and getting fully invested. Like I also the first time reading Gardens of the Moon, I was pretty impressed, and I thought, okay, this is pretty cool. I'm definitely reading the rest of these. But Deadhouse Gates is what signaled to me, okay, this could be the best thing I've ever read. Actually, this series really has, there's something different here, really different, and in terms of the scale and in terms of the emotions and just so much. I was floored by Deadhouse Gates the first time, and it really was. I think mostly the first time, Chain of Dogs, as Kathi was saying, that really was just so different and as Kathi said so well, you really kind of felt every step of that journey, and it was it's quite harrowing what you go through there. But I think my second time, I want to say that the Fellison arc hit me harder the second time reading it than it did the first time. And I think that it is maybe one of the most underrated aspects of the book, or Malazan in general, is that her journey, and that it's more personal. It's a smaller scale than the Chain of Dogs. So the Chain of Dogs obviously is the big shiny thing in there that really grabs your attention. But there's so much that Erickson is doing with the Fellison arc in terms of the themes of the series as a whole too. Like, they're both very important. He goes back to these themes again and again. But when you're talking about what happens in the Fellison arc, just in general terms, in terms of the suffering that she goes through, and the othering, and the pain that she and her fellow travelers experience, both in terms of the external threats, but also the internal. Are they enemies? Are they friends? And they're going through this horrific experience together and hurting each other, but also saving each other sometimes. And it's just this very Malazan-esque journey in so many ways, because you have these characters who hate each other, but also there is a bond that's created in the process of this journey. So it's got a lot going on. And, in terms of what Fellison, this young woman, goes through, and the effects on her. And I think it's it's an exercise in empathy in many ways, to, I think, understand her as a character, and the ways that she reacts to what's happening to her and to the people around her. Uh, it's a story that asks you to put yourself in someone else's shoes, and if you're successful in doing that, I think that you're going to have a lot of feelings, a lot of emotions, and I do think that like a lot of other things, Malazan, as you read further in the series and you find out later things, it even adds. That's why that second time reading it was even more impactful for me, because I knew what would happen in later books to certain characters, and or had gotten a fuller picture of who these people were. And so it just gains in a reread. So yeah, that's kind of my experience with the Deadhouse Gates specifically.
Awesome. Yeah, I would definitely agree about what you both said about the Chain of Dogs and as well as Fellison's arc, because the Chain of Dogs for me on the first read was what I enjoyed more of, because it was just very harrowing to be every step with them, and also having the point of view of Daiko, the historian. I really loved his sort of arc, and I really enjoyed reading about Coltane. I think he's one of my favorite characters, and I wish we had a lot more of him in this book. But I completely understand why Stephen wrote it the way it ended up being. But I would say the Fellison arc is definitely one that I really was impacted by on the second read, just like you, Philip, because the first time I didn't know what was going to happen later, and I feel like knowing her full journey, it was just a lot more impactful, and it made me a lot more emotional to read those scenes, because I was like, man, like all this suffering they're having to go through. They meet Escol Pust, which was a lot of fun, but like overall, they had such a nasty journey, and knowing where they end up, it's like, man, it's like, to me, I don't think all that pain was worth going through, knowing what happens at the end, because it was so like, it's just very gut wrenching, the end of the characters. I mean, I really enjoy the POV of Bowden, Valison, and also Hiboric. I think Hiboric's my favorite out of the three, but in terms of impact, I think Valison's my number one. So I'm very curious to know, sort of, because the world building just evolved in this book. I feel like we get a lot more info about the Jaggets. We have a lot more info about sort of the Trigal Trade Guild, which is something that I thought came out of nowhere the first read. But on the second read, I saw all the seeds planted for them to come in and help them, help the characters kind of the last second with Coltane and delivering water at a very important point in the journey. And I really enjoyed it, but I'm very curious to know what you guys think of sort of the world building in this book. How did it differ from book one? Did you enjoy even more? Like, what's your thoughts on the world building for book two? Kathi, would you like to go first?
I feel that it built on the world of Gardens of the Moon, in that we were given hints regarding the Jaggers, regarding the Talani Mass, and it's with each subsequent book, including Deadhouse Gates, I felt that Stephen Erickson expanded on the world. So I got a better idea of what a Jagged was, of what an Imas was. Divers, I don't know how you pronounce that. That took me a while actually to figure out, because I've only read this once, so I haven't had a reread of it. And I was like, I have no idea what's going on, but I'm sure that he is going to, give me enough information to be able to work out this world and work out that this is another continent. And so it is different. And Ruraku, for example, I felt was almost a character in itself in this world, quite different to Pale or Darajistan. It seemed alive. It seemed to have so much history as well. And that's one thing I really noticed in Deadhouse Gates, was how much history is a part of this universe. It's such a rich history too. I mean, we're going back thousands of years that he's talking about. And that is another element that really enriched the story for me, knowing how much history is a part of this world and that I'm only seeing glimpses of it. But I loved the world building. I thought, wow, there's even more going on. And there's even more creatures and history that I wasn't aware of from Gardens of the Moon. And maybe that was necessary to expand the world to what we get at the end. I don't know, but I loved it.
Fantastic. How about you, Philip?
So we saw in Gardens of the Moon some of the consequences of an acquisitive, aggressive empire encroaching on someone else's territory. We saw Pale, for example. We saw the machinations around Darujistan and the casualties that result from that. And that's all stemming from a power, an entity coming from the outside and saying, hey, we think we want that. We want your territory. That should belong to our empire because we're really better than you and we would do a better job of running things here. So let us have it. Seven Cities is a colonized continent. The Malazan Empire is, as much as we often feel we're rooting for members of that empire, the Whiskey Jacks and the Quick Bens and the characters that we root for and love, that's an evil empire. And they have done some horrible things. Yeah, okay, you could also say like the Roman Empire, well, they brought aqueducts and roads and whatnot, right? What are the Romans ever done?
What everyone says. Right? Yeah, they always say that, but they don't count the cost of bringing those things. Yeah.
And here we're seeing the cost. This is in terms of the world building, we are seeing the cost of empire in a visceral way. And I think that is just so well done. And that is something that I think Erickson does thematically even better in Deadhouse Gates than in Gardens of the Moon, in terms of showing us the cost. The Chain of Dogs itself is a manifestation in many ways. You feel the rage, and it is personified in some ways in Drijna, in Raraku itself. It is a justified rage in many ways of the people of Seven Cities against their colonizer, their oppressor. So the rebellion that's taking this, the whole backdrop to this is a rebellion that they want to cast off these shackles, chains being a really important malazan light motif, if you will. It's something that comes all over the place, but yeah, they are in chains in a sense because they're colonized. So in terms of world building and introducing us to the circumstances of a colonized people in rebellion and the different layers of conflict that can create, because you have some locals who side with the empire and you have some who are very much against. You have members of the Malazan Empire who are sympathetic to the locals. You have people like Duiker, who is a historian with clear eyes, and he knows what's going on around him. He knows the cost of empire like almost no one else, because he also was a soldier.
Yeah.
He's got this view of the consequences of imperial ambition that I think is a really important part of the message of Deadhouse Gates. So yeah, and I also love what Kathi said about the layers of this. You feel you get glimpses of little remnants of the civilizations of the past, and you realize that these dramas have played out several times. There have been empires in the past that have brutally exploited people and caused the death of thousands and millions, and our tendency to strip the world around us to suit our needs. The consequences of that. This wasn't always a desert, There were thriving civilizations there once upon a time, but what happened? Well, we screwed it up. We messed up the world.
Yeah,
it's an old story. So yeah, that those layers of world building in there, really fantastic. It's one of the reasons I love fantasy, is that you get this sense of the importance of the past and the past as a mirror of us, and we are repeating a lot of those same mistakes in many ways. So yeah, it's just really powerful stuff.
I never realized that, or perhaps it just didn't occur to me that the actual empire itself is also part of the world building. I just assumed all the creatures and all of that, but I perceived what the empire was doing as political more than world building. But I guess it's all part of the same thing, isn't it? Yeah. But it's you made an excellent point. That is definitely a message throughout this entire series, not just in this book. And I think what I love so much about Erickson's writing is, even though I am anti-colonialism, even though I'm against empires that do subjugate other cultures, I still could not help but feel so much empathy for the Malazans.
Yep.
I couldn't help it, because ultimately it boils down to, yes, they may be your oppressors, but these are refugees, just regular people who weren't involved in the decision-making process, but who have settled here, and you are killing them like animals. You're crucifying children. That makes it very hard for me to empathize with those who have been colonized by this empire. So, and I find he's so good at that, at making me conflicted about both sides of a conflict.
Yeah. You have the added layer of irony that the most heroic among the Malazans are the Wiccans, who back in their home continent are an oppressed minority who have become a tool of the empire. And of course, we can't say much about it, but the fate of the Wiccans is also one of the big tragedies of the series in many ways, but the willingness to exploit groups of people and how oppressed people within an empire can become part of the apparatus of empire is a really, I think, powerful message in here as well. That it's the Wiccans who are they're the ones who are essentially, when it comes to the chain of dogs, you take the Wiccans, and sorry, they never would have made it. There's no way. So yeah, I think that's also a very deliberate part of what Erickson was doing in here, having the Wiccans be the ones to be under Coltane, of course, to be in charge. And Coltane becomes a symbol, really, in many ways, especially his fate at the end, and the willingness of the Empire to take a tool and use it brutally, and maybe even cast it aside when it's convenient. Is a big part of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic because you guys touched on the themes a little bit, and I really enjoyed the themes of this book especially. And I think the world building has a big impact on the themes because it is such a tough continent to live on. And so I think it's very sort of ripe for the world to also have that layer that isn't exactly human caused in terms of like what it does to the characters, but it just feels like a cycle of history that just happens and happens over and over again. And it's really fascinating to read about. And I would love to sort of talk about the themes of this book and sort of, I'm going to go ahead and open it up to spoilers through the book. That way we can kind of talk about the end fates for some of these characters. So for anyone who hasn't read this book, this is now the time for you to kind of exit and, save yourself, because the reveals in this book, I think, are very emotional for me, and I don't want to ruin that for anyone else. So this is my warning. I think everything with the chain of dogs and how it meets its very tragic end is very emotional to read about. And reading about, I think it's Malik Well, who basically betrays everyone and kind of allows this mass slaughter to happen, was very disappointing to me on the first read. But this time I saw it right from the beginning of how shifty he was and knowing that he was going to betray them. And it was very more emotional for me this time than it was the last time. The last time I was just so angry and just disappointed about it because I wanted to see Coltane, go, all over the world and do that. But it makes sense why the events happened. And I would love to sort of talk about more of the themes with you and sort of see, like, what's the one that was the most emotional for you? So I would also say Felison and also Mappo and Ikariam. Those are my two favorite storylines in this book, personally. So what do you think about the themes, Kathi?
Well, I think Philip already also touched on this theme regarding the imperialist and a culture that has been subjugated by another, which of course will lead to rebellion. So that is also, I think, a major theme throughout this series. We are constantly made to empathize with the malazans because that's who we are following throughout the series, for most of the series. And yet they are a conquering nation. So I think that is a major theme, but also that there are two sides to a conflict. And this is one of, I think, Stephen Erickson's great strengths, is making us see both sides of a conflict so that you can make up your own mind as to, okay, maybe they're wrong in this, but there is a reason for their behavior. So you can understand why certain groups or individuals make certain decisions. I think Empathy, I know sympathy. Everyone talks about sympathy in relation to malazan. And of course, that is a major part of it, because that is also something that defines us as human, is our ability to sympathize with others, to empathize with their position, to foster understanding. Because I think if you can't understand, or if you can't empathize with a person or see their viewpoint, it's very hard then to understand why they behave a certain way. So I just see it as an essential part of being human, to sympathize with people. And I think another theme in this book is sacrifice. And what are you willing to give up for someone else, especially self-sacrifice for a group? Given that Coltrane is a Wiccan, yet he was willing to sacrifice his life, his men's life, to protect what he considered innocence, because that was a duty laid on him to lead these people. And I think that is also a big theme throughout the series, let alone in this book. I'm sure that there are others. I am not really a reader who goes in thinking about themes. I just think about what happens in a book and realize this is what I like and this is what I don't like. I don't try to analyze a book as I'm reading it, though you spend a lot of time afterwards analyzing books. But that is just a couple that came into my mind. But I did want to mention that I did not feel, or I was very torn over my feelings for Spellison. Now, I haven't read this a second time, and I'm very curious to see if my viewpoint of her will change. But I really struggled to sympathize with this character, because she was just so horrible to everyone around her, regardless of her reasons. And whilst perhaps if I was in her position, I might behave a certain way, I don't think everyone does. I think that there are people who behave differently when terrible things have happened to them, but she made it very hard to feel sympathy for her. And I think that was also an aim of Stephen Erickson's, that sometimes people can still do terrible things or behave terribly, but you can still feel, or should at least try to understand, why they're behaving the way they are. And chains. Chains, I think, well, House of Chains makes it very clear that it is an important element, but that is definitely something that runs, I feel, throughout the series as well. How we are chained by our beliefs in deities, we are chained by duty, by honor, as well as any physical chains that we might have. So that's just some of the themes that came to mind in Deadhouse Gates. And also I think the series as a whole, because they are fleshed out further throughout the books. Am I off beam, or am I have I missed something? I'm sure I've missed something massive, but well, perhaps you guys can help me there. What have I missed?
No, I think you're spot on. Just imagine being in Coltane's position. That is the whole chain of dogs. In a way, you could see it as an act of sacrifice, as you said, an act of compassion. Think about it. Coltane and the Wiccans, they belong to a group that has been persecuted mercilessly back in their home continent, and these are the very people they're protecting along this journey. The very people who have persecuted them. That takes some serious, compassion. They could have easily just abandoned all those idiots and saved themselves. Yeah. That is a serious act of compassion. If you can't see the compassion there, then I don't know, what you're looking at, but that is a major sacrifice. And of course, he ends up losing his life in the process. And there are other individual smaller acts as well of compassion throughout. Duiker's increasing understanding of Coltane and admiration for him. And you have Duiker being sort of revived at the end as well, which is a harrowing scene in many ways. You've got within the Felison arc, which I agree is painful to read. And the things they do to each other. But there are certain moments where, like when Bowden comes back for Felison. Why does he do that? And I have to read into this, somewhat, because he's been essentially tasked with protecting her. He's probably not a claw, but a talon, probably. He is what he is. But I think in the moment when he comes back for her and saves her, and as a result gets horribly burned, that is an act that's coming from a desire to, but despite all the pain between them and the hurting of each other, I do feel that he has some compassion for her. And it's not just a duty at that point. It is genuine, like, concern and care and wanting to do right by her, despite everything they've gone through. Another wonderful, and maybe the most powerful individual moment, is when Squint has to shoot Coltane with the arrow. Now that is one of the most powerful, iconic scenes in the entire Malazan Book of the Fallen.
Yeah.
And it's that perspective, I think, that gives that scene its emotional weight. It's not that we are seeing Coltane suffering, being crucified. It's the fact that Squint is seeing it and has to shoot him, and it feels all the emotions and the conflict and everything else. But it's an act of compassion. He knows that he's going to be haunted by this for the rest of his life, but he does it to end Coltane's suffering.
Yeah.
So it is an act of compassion. And again, wow. I mean, just all the complex layers in that moment, but the beauty of it and the suffering and the pain and all of it rolled into one moment is just tremendous, right? So that's a theme that gets really beautifully reinforced. Another theme we haven't talked about much, but it's one that really comes through with Duiker, and to a degree Hiboric, because he's also a historian, but is the unreliability of history, the tendency of the winner to change the narrative. We see this all the time, where those in power say, no, you didn't see this, you saw that, because we're telling you this is what you saw, right? That happens in real time all the time, even today. But that's something that Duiker is very aware of, and that's part of his cynicism, I think, is the tendency for, and that's how Hiboric got in trouble in the first place, was he wanted to tell the truth. And the Empire said, no, that's not what history is. History is what we tell you it is. It's propaganda. And Hiboric got into trouble because he refused to play along with that, So that's a big theme, a Malazan theme in general, too, I think, is the ways in which people can be manipulated through history and through a narrative that the fact that different perspectives would tell a story differently too. Sometimes it's not just that cynical lying that you see in order to change the narrative. Sometimes it's genuinely, no, I saw this, and the other side sees that, and who's to say which is more valid, So there are more, but those are the ones that leap to mind.
Awesome. Yeah, I really loved what you guys said. It's very, it was just very well done. And I would also say survival and vigilance is another major theme of this book, because there are so many points in each of these characters' journeys where they could just give up or walk away if they wanted. And they don't. They stick to the mission. They keep going. And it's really impactful to read that even if they know it's a losing battle. I think Duiker mentions it like towards the end of the book, but he's talking about how like he doesn't feel like he's going to be able to get out of this alive, and he doesn't think really anyone is, but he's sort of questioning Coltane's decision making because he's like, there's no way for this to end except by death. And why are we still doing this? But they stick to the mission and they are able to deliver the chain of dogs, but they have a betrayal happen, and that undoes all of the work that they put in. And it's really a big tragedy, I feel like. And also for Fellison, there's a lot of points where she could have just killed herself or committed suicide because she was in such a grim circumstance from the very first chapter with her. I think the prologue is when she's kind of arrested and sent to the Ototawa mines. And I love that location. I think it's really fascinating. It's one that I don't think I've read really anything like it outside of Malazan. And so I love that location, the magic.
And you say, Christian, when you say you love that location, that doesn't mean you want to go on vacation there or something.
Not at all.
No.
Yeah, I'm keeping that 10 feet away with my pole, like far away from me. But I think it's a really fascinating world building thing, and also it really cements the themes as well because it is such a tough area. We have sections of the caves collapsing, and it's just business as usual. Like, okay, we just lost 100 prisoners, but we can get 100 more later. It doesn't matter, and they don't even dock their pay. That they don't do anything to the supervisors. And there is a rebellion that happens, which was a lot more impactful for me this read because I love the first half of Fellison's story on my first read, but now knowing her full journey, it really impacted me, knowing where she was headed and how she was always just holding on to that little thin thread of hope in order to one day get to her sister and get revenge on her. And we can talk more about that in the full series spoiler section, but I think that is very... It's just great to see that she never gives up. And even though she gets very close to giving up, she always had her Bullock or Bowden there to kind of pick up the slack for her. And even if they did not like each other, they still stayed together and tried to survive. And I just really love that theme, this book, especially on this read, because that was something I was so miserable reading her story the first time I read it.
Yeah.
But knowing where she's headed, like, it was just so much more impactful, this read.
It changes your perspective of her, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I can see myself on a reread feeling more empathy with the character than I did the first time. Yeah.
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 So, Christian, you mentioned those Otadero mines, and in my mind, that's one of the most powerful representations of the dehumanization that occurs under an oppressive regime. That they're treating the people in that place as garbage, as fodder. And in order to run an empire, an oppressive power, that's what you do. You just dehumanize and you exploit without regard to the humanity that you are expunging from the world. It's just awful, but it's accurate. Look at prisons, look at concentration camps. It's very much a reflection of real world history.
Yeah.
But on a positive note, another example of compassion you mentioned earlier a little bit, but I feel like we're leaving out our bros, Mappo.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you gather enough from Deadhouse Gates that he's kind of tasked with minding Icarium, but that relationship has grown into something else, hasn't it?
Yes.
Like there's real compassion, there's real bond there, there's a real love there.
There's love, yeah,
between them. So I just wanted to mention that because that's just yet another facet of this theme that Erikson is presenting to us.
And friendship.
Yeah.
I wanted to say that it is a major theme throughout the entire series, how important friendships are, that they can become as close as family. And yeah, I did want to mention also Meppo and Icarium because I adored them. I thought they were wonderful. I didn't understand half of what was going on with them to begin with, but you get to see why or what Mappo is actually, what his role is. And I couldn't help but feel sorry for Icarium as well, that he would be constantly losing his memories of the past, but that Mappo felt it was necessary. I thought he had such a hard role to protect not just the world, but also his friend from himself.
Yeah.
And the ramifications of actions he might take. Yeah, that was a wonderful, wonderful part of the book. I thought so anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I could have had like an entire series just about Mappa and Ikariam, and I'd be very happy.
Yeah.
Like they are
Yeah.
just such a great duo to hang out with. And we also have some really exciting world building with that because we know that Mappa and Ikariam, they've been sort of going about the world for thousands of years. And we know that Ikariam has basically destroyed entire civilizations. And so Erickson is able to very expertly, I feel like, explore, how time changes humanity and civilizations. And it really all comes down to one person, which is not very, that's not a common thing in history, except for like big, sort of tyrannical sort of figures, like, Genghis
Calor.
Khan, yeah, Hitler, like all these different people.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating to get that in a fantasy series because like I feel like a lot of other authors they would just go for the sort of easy route and make them like action heroes basically, but there's a lot more humanity to these characters and a lot of emotions going on beneath the surface. And the first time I read Mappa and Ikariam, I loved it. Like I was just so struck by the emotions, the friendship. It was just really fantastic, and I loved it even more on the reread because I knew that a lot of it's going to be just basically Erickson just pouring all his world building onto the page, and knowing what I know about the world building through the entire series, it was so nice to kind of get the reminders I needed and sort of revisiting all these different locations because there's a lot of amazing descriptions where they're going through and they see just like a shattered pot or something. And then Mappo for like 4 paragraphs goes on about that civilization. And I love reading that stuff. That's like my favorite thing in Malazan is getting that history. And it's just really well realized, I feel like.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing. Like I cannot get enough of Mappo and Ikariam. And I wish they were in the series more. Like, and I would also say I want to mention Leoman of the Flails because he is just such a.
Oh,
I did not
yes.
like him the first time.
He always seemed quite indifferent. Like he really didn't care one way or another. That was always the impression I got in the first book, which was reinforced later. But I always thought he's just in it because he doesn't agree with the Malazans being in power, but he really didn't care about anyone. That was always how I felt about it. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think he's pretty jaded. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Well,
It's-
I just thought he didn't care. I thought okay, I am a 7 city citizen, so yes, I'm rebelling and I'm smart enough to be in a good position of power, but it wasn't because his heart was in it. That
Yeah,
was
I
always
wonder.
the impression I got.
I wonder if that's a product, though, of just seeing so much suffering and being involved in so much violence that you become almost immune to the effects.
Yeah. It's a possibility, but given what does happen later, I suspect that that's not it. I think it goes beyond that. I think it depends. I think his character is just. I don't know if we can say any spoilers about future books, so I don't want to say too much. But yeah, I think it wasn't just being jaded, I think, or immune to what the suffering. I think he's just not a nice person. Let's leave it at that.
Well, people do react differently to those kinds of experiences. So some people who see that amount of violence and participate in that kind of violence become like Leomon. Others get PTSD and feel incredible guilt. Others somehow come out of it more or less sane. You know, they're just different responses to that. But yeah, I think you're right. It partly is a product of his individual personality responding that way to the trauma he has seen and inflicted in his life. And, you know, if you think you have a cause that justifies inflicting pain and violence and suffering on others, well, guess what? That's still going to have an effect on you. You know, that participating in those things, it's not just about the suffering that innocents go through. It's about the suffering that the people who perpetrate the violence inflict on themselves as well, you know. And any soldier who's ever been in a conflict can tell you that that's a big part of it. It's not just, seeing myself suffer or my buddies suffer. It's, what have I done? What have I done to other people? And in the moment, of course, to survive, you have to tell yourself that's not a person that I'm doing this to. But deep down, I don't think you can shut that off entirely. So, you know, so he's done some terrible things. And yeah, I think you're right. He's reacted to that probably in one of the worst ways. Yeah.
Yeah, and I also want to mention the characters of Kalam and Crocus and Apsalai in this book because I did not remember that they were even in this book when I was going back into
there's some big stuff going on there, yeah.
And it was so fascinating to get because we also have bits and pieces of Shadow Throne and Cotillion showing up here and there, like dreams, and we also get a lot with the Shadow Hounds or whatever, the Hounds of Shadow. And like I just loved all that even more on reread. Like it was just so nice. And I completely missed that Apsalai reunited with her father at the end of the book. And that was something I just had no memory of. And I was like, this is so great. How did I even not catch this the first time? But there was just so much going on. As the first time reader, I was just like, going along with the, river, whatever, surrendering myself. But I want to get into full series spoilers for the last 5 or so minutes because I think there's a lot to talk about, especially with Felison, in terms of where her character goes in House of Chains. Because that was one of the biggest disappointments to me on first read was that her sister kills Felison. And yeah. And
really? You were disappointed?
I was very disappointed. Yeah.
I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was so ironical and sad, heartbreaking. And I thought that was the whole point about it. That's why we didn't have a major battle, because this was really the heart of that story, the conflict between the two sisters. And yeah, Tavor not knowing that it was Felison. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that scene personally, but I know some people don't. Some people don't really love the book as well. So, yeah, I'm curious to hear more. That you were disappointed that Felison died, or at the way that book ended.
So I actually loved the book, and I was happy with the kind of lower scale ending. But I think for me, it was that she didn't know that it was her sister, and I was like, that was so sad, to read about, because the other soldiers, they know, and they never tell her by the end of The Crippled God that she did that. And
I hope
it's
they never do.
yeah.
Yeah. It will destroy her. It would
Yeah.
destroy her. Yeah.
And like knowing where Fellison is going, like this read was just a lot more impactful because I'm very curious to know how my reread will go with House of Chains, because that book to me is very Casa Orlong focused, and I didn't realize that he was in the book in this one particularly, Deadhouse Gates. He's just called Toblakai.
Yeah,
And I
Toblerone.
loved him on the first read, but I was kind of like, oh, like he's probably just some small character. And then everything that happens in the first quarter of House of Chains, I was like, no, this is easily one of my favorite characters because there's so much thematically going on with him. And I just really love just having this giant, basically, in the story who makes just such a giant impact on
Who
the
kills
characters.
children.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the first lines, I think, in the book. And so you immediately hate him
Mm-hmm.
because he kills children. That's what he kept saying. It was spectacular, that beginning. I agree with you. And I have a soft spot for Casa. I think a lot of people do. But with Fellison, it was House of Chains where I finally really started to empathize with this character.
Mhm.
So when she was killed at the end, oh, I found that so heartrending because she'd gone through so much. She wasn't even looking to fight her sister, and she just allowed Tavor to kill her. And I thought, oh, sacrifice, right? Yeah, that's how I saw it, as a sacrifice by Fellison.
And wanting
But
to be loved by her sister, and not understanding that when she had put her in the Otadero mines, it was an attempt to save her life.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it was just a sense of betrayal. And Tavor, the tragedy of her not knowing, but it is an act of compassion not to tell Tavor, oops, that was your sister. But that's
yes,
also, I think, a moment where we see how Empire puts sister against sister, brother against brother. You know, you
yes.
have people who ought to love each other being set onto different sides of the conflict because of the atrocities that Empire entails. You know, and you have those who are loyal and obedient to the Empire, and then you have those who rebel, and oftentimes you divide families that way. You know,
I think there's also this major aspect of the series is it isn't just about those who comply with the rules, it's also those who manipulate the rules, like Malik Realm.
yeah,
When I read about him and what he did in in Deadhouse Gates, and then we read about him later, I was flabbergasted. I thought, what?
this
And
is
I
a
just
world.
finished.
This
Yeah.
is a world where the Malik Rels get ahead, and
Yes.
the
Yes.
Coltanes are slaughtered. You know,
Yeah. And
unfortunately.
the effect, like not just what they did to Coltane, but also vilifying the Wiccans,
Yep.
rewriting history, right? We were talking about that before,
Yep.
how history is written by the victors.
Yep.
Corbolo. Yeah, there's a lot involved in these books. I think you can just analyze them for weeks, months, because he has incorporated a lot of different aspects of not just imperial life, just human nature as well, I think. Yeah.
It makes you wonder how many of the heroes of our past were actually really horrible people that were
Yeah.
just
It
made
does.
marketing, you know,
Yeah.
or
Yeah. Yeah.
propaganda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so true. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, awesome. I also want to mention that we get our first sort of mention of Calloy in this book because he was emperor at this time in the far past on this continent. And reading about him later in the series, like he's not a character I like
Hate him.
overall. Yeah, but
Sorry, but I do. Yeah.
yeah, he's just so fascinating to read about though because he is so
True.
ancient.
True.
And he has such a impact on the series. But
Yeah.
we're about 1 out of time, so I want to wrap this up So
Yep.
I want to thank you too for joining me on this discussion. I've had a lot of fun, and I hope
Thank you.
you guys did too. So
I really
Thank
did.
you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you both.
Yes, thank you. It was lovely talking to you both. Yes, thank you so much for having us.
you're welcome. And if you're still watching, thank you so much for watching. And I hope to see you guys again for Memories of Ice. So thank you everyone for watching, and thank you both for joining with me. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.